Perfect. So let's get started. All right, guys, welcome to what blood work actually matters and when to test. This is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, very near and dear to my expertise. So I wanted to share basically everything I've come to understand with you all today. So why this session exists? This session exists because in my work, which I'll talk to you about more, but also professionally and then in my own business, what I constantly see and who I am myself is and are health conscious, highly educated women who just simply don't have enough context, have enough answers, and have enough practical information to help you figure out your own body and then what to do about it when you do get the information. Either you cannot get certain tests done for your doctor beyond the basics, or you're told it's not relevant until you are trying to conceive, or you've been unsuccessfully trying to conceive for a certain amount of time. Even if that's not the case for you, you just generally get a lot of pushback, or the testing that you can get done is like a million bajillion dollars. And say you've gotten them, how do you then interpret the information you do have? So I run into a lot of questions where people are like, I've gotten the basics, but even that, I don't know how to read it, or it's all normal. I still think something's wrong, or I don't know if it's enough. Like, should I get specialized testing? So I'm looking for help navigating the more specific testing to body systems. So we're going to be going through all that today. I've got a lot, like I mentioned, a bit about me, just so if we've never met before, I'm Michelle, and I am a scientist by training. So my background is in biology, and I have a master's in nutrition. So I'm very well steeped in the health and wellness space. I'm currently the director of science for biotechnology, personalized wellness blood testing company, actually, Inside Tracker. Lenine is my colleague, so we work together, and I've been there for about 7 years now. So shout out Lenine. And basically, I say that because I have such a heavy scientific background, but when it came to navigating my own health, coming off of birth control, understanding the underlying issues that I had had in my whole own life, which was severe hormonal acne, severe period pain, pretty, on and off PMS. I couldn't quite pinpoint when it would happen and when it wouldn't. I had literally no idea how to handle it. I had no idea how to fix it, despite all that training. So I say all this to educate you that the stuff that I'm about to teach you today, your doctor probably doesn't have access to. They were not taught this. A lot of this is very, very specific understandings that you can only get when you deeply understand how to read the human body and then how to translate it. And that's why I got so into this. I'll talk a lot today about hormones because that's a huge passion of mine. And I'm currently a FAM certified menstrual and fertility health practitioner. So this is like very much all aligned with what I love to talk about all day. So basically, what I've come to understand after all this time in this space is that blood work is very powerful, but it's also super limited. We just want to understand what it can tell us and what it can't. I think it's something that if you have access to, it's amazing to do. I always say the more data, the better, but only when it actually helps you out. Because too much data, I see this again and again, you can drive yourself crazy with guessing. So basically, like information overload. And you're getting advice from this Instagram person and this doctor or this podcast or this functional practitioner, and you're having a lot of trouble putting it together. Or often you just fall into this category of hoarding data, which is when you're tracking everything. Like you've got the aura and you get the blood tests and you get the like all the gadgets and you have all this information on you at basically a very precise level, but you really don't know what to do with it. So I'm a firm believer that you track better when you understand more, and it's all about having the proper understanding from jump. So how I see labs and what they're so amazing for is that if you get tested frequently over time, they're amazing for trend detection because only then do you actually know, is what you're doing actually working? Were the changes you made enough to see significant impacts over time? Or if you just have one blood test result, it's a really nice snapshot of your health. So a lot of people walk around being like, what if I have this like undetectable problem that I don't know about? Or what if something's changed? Getting that one-off blood test can give you a lot of information. It can also help you identify systems under strain. So if we see a lot of out of range wonkiness happening in metabolic markers, or if we see a lot of out of range happening in hormonal markers, you can kind of zero in on certain body systems and then use that as a jumping off point for more specialized testing or working with a more like experienced practitioner for that particular body system. And then finally, what labs are also really good about are confirming or ruling out hypotheses or diagnoses in this case, because a lot of them do rely on certain levels of certain blood tests. But what they cannot tell us are the fluctuations of the things that change day to day or over the course of about a month or so. So these are the markers that flux, they're a certain level in the morning and then they're a certain level at night. Or for women, this is the big issue, right? We have a lot of markers that the infradian rhythm or the menstrual cycle affects. And if that's not taken into account when you get tested or when you're analyzing your blood work, this can cause a lot of unnecessary stress. What it also doesn't capture are the emotional and nervous system effects on your body. And I'm not like flippantly throwing this in because everyone talks about nervous system regulation and how important it is. It is. But I say this because I have seen this more and more and more because basically what's happening is your brain is an electrical, like there's neuroenergetics that are happening at all times. And to think that the thoughts and the emotions and the things going around in our mental, like day-to-day life aren't impacting our biology is a fallacy. So all the things that you do from the practical perspective, they matter. So the food you eat, the exercises you do, the lifestyle cleanup, non-toxic swaps, all of that, that's amazing. But we are half physical, half energetic beings, so our healing must be as well. Like you can do all the perfect things in the practical sense, but even that's only half the equation. We have to address this internal component as well. And then what a lab also isn't going to tell you is functional capacity or resilience. So how do you feel? And this is the exact case that we were talking about earlier, which is like, I got all these perfect labs, but I don't feel fine. Like I know something's the matter, even if I'm falling within this clinically normal range. So what do I do in that case? Sorry, I wasn't sure if there was a question or anything, but this concept, before we get into the labs themselves, is super important because I really love to explain the human body this way. And that is that everything exists in a hierarchy. And this is just by evolutionary design. So the things that are most important for our survival are the things that our body is going to direct energy and nutrients and oxygen to the most. So this is what is going to keep you alive until tomorrow. You need your heart to keep beating, your lungs to keep breathing, your brain to keep thinking. So that is immediate survival priority. And then how this relates to, the nervous system capacity too, is that this is that flight or fight scenario, classic example being chased by a bear. Your body needs to divert resources to the things that are going to keep you alive. And then if we look all the way at the bottom, this is why I love reproductive health and hormonal health so much, is because this is actually your lowest priority body system. Because you don't need the capacity to reproduce to stay alive until tomorrow. So basically what I'm trying to say is by focusing on your reproductive system, if anything is going wrong in the body systems above the food chain, it's going to show up in the menstrual cycle. It's going to show up in the reproductive system. So by focusing on the reproductive system and essentially getting clues from what's going on about your entire body from that lowest priority system and building it back up, you in turn support every other body system all the way to the top. So we'll be going through each of these, but basically this is really closely tied to your nervous system and stress regulation. So the ability to switch between the sympathetic and parasympathetic side is due to the nervous system, which needs support, and we have ways of checking in on that through blood work. Energy production. So how well are you utilizing the foods you eat for fuel, maintenance and defense? This is things like your immune system, which is a major one. So you hear a lot about chronic inflammation and how that contributes to a lot of illness today. Things like filtration, maintenance, cleanup in the body, and then all the way at the bottom, like I said, the reproductive system. So reproductive system, first thing to go in a system that's out of balance. And typically it's the last thing to be regained in a health journey. But when you have a really well functioning reproductive system, that is a really good clue that your entire body, everything is falling into place. The hormones are signaling properly, energy is being diverted to everywhere it needs to go. It's not picking and choosing because it feels like it has to. And it's just a really nice way to take a very holistic approach in a more easily digestible way. And a way that you can tangibly keep your eye on, because that's always nice to know. But when it comes to blood work, this can be very tangible too. So the top labs to know that I always like to recommend people look for, broken down at this sort of, prioritized body system way, are primarily the lipid panel. So this is your HDL, LDL, triglycerides, and total cholesterol. Now, this is probably going to be present in most basic blood works that you've had drawn before. And we'll go into like what each of these are and what they can tell you. But that's typically one that I like to look at for just overall like health and heart health and metabolism function. And then when we get into stress, really good ones to look for are cortisol, DHEA, thyroid panel, so the full thyroid panel, if you can get that, and vitamin D. For energy production, it's going to be amazing to know your insulin, your fasted glucose, your HbA1c, leptin, and vitamin B12. For inflammation and overall oxygen transport, what we're going to want to look for are HSCRP, CBC, so a complete blood count, iron, and ferritin. And then for our reproductive system, knowing your estradiol, progesterone, LH, FSH, prolactin, testosterone, SHBG, and AMH are really great to know. I know it's a lot of acronyms. We're going to go through all of them. But just if you wanted a list to write down and have in the back of your pocket, these are the ones that you can get a lot of information for, and they're quite actionable, which means you can actually do something about them. So for metabolic markers, these are really important to put at the top because they're all encompassing and they affect pretty much every other body system you have. So I put together fasting glucose, HbA1c, and insulin because they're all going to tell us a story about how your body is handling its blood sugar. And blood sugar regulation, insulin sensitivity, and metabolic health are really the core of a lot of chronic disease today, and a key culprit in many reproductive health issues, namely PCOS. So PCOS at its root tends to be metabolic. It tends to be linked to insulin resistance and chronically high inflammation. And what that does is disrupts the communication between the brain and the ovary. So hormones, again, it's nothing happens in a vacuum. So it's really, you'll hear me say again and again how intricately linked all of these are. A lot of modern medicine likes to silo these things like, oh, you get a high fasting glucose, you have a blood sugar problem. It's like, okay, well, think about all the other downstream effects that high glucose could mean. This is what I mean when I say like it's more intrinsic and all-encompassing. So the good thing about this is that they're heavily influenced by your diet and lifestyle. So fasting glucose is going to tell us, how much sugar is in your blood after an overnight fast. Typically, you fast overnight and get tested in the morning. HbA1c is a long-term blood marker, so it's actually going to tell you like what your blood sugar regulation looked like for the past 3 months. And insulin is really great too because insulin sensitivity is sort of the secret behind glucose getting in. So insulin lets glucose into your cells to be used for energy or stored for energy later. And if insulin is resistant, so if your cells aren't letting the blood sugar in, this is when blood sugar creeps up. It becomes a problem for the whole body, and you essentially run into this insulin resistant high blood sugar profile. That's really related to the lipid panel, and that's LDL, HDL, total cholesterol, and triglycerides. Again, this tells us about your heart health, your ability to process fat when we look at your triglycerides, and how well your overall metabolism is functioning. Like the blood sugar markers, these are also heavily influenced by diet, lifestyle, but genetics do play a part in cholesterol as well. So I wanted to throw in two, I wasn't sure if people were going to have questions about these. They're very popular in like media and wellness conversations today, but ApoB and LP little a, if you've heard of these. These are essentially like more um, these are like newer markers that are being used in the conversation of looking at heart health and overall health. And for ApoB, that's an amazing one to get if you can. Not a lot of doctors are fans of adding this on to a traditional lipid panel, but the reasoning I have for that is because ApoB is actually a direct measurement. Oh, these are new terms for me. Okay, amazing. Let me explain it to you this way then. So lipid panel classic assessment. They're essentially LDL was your bad cholesterol, HDL was your good cholesterol, and total cholesterol was those two things combined. And essentially, people were really pushing the narrative that cholesterol is bad, cholesterol is bad. But the thing about a name like LDL cholesterol is bad. You want to get that number down, down, down. But the thing about this is LDL is actually calculated in a standard blood work panel. So it's not actually a direct measurement of this bad cholesterol. ApoB, however, is a direct measurement of how many potentially artery clogging particles are in your blood. So it's standardized, it's an exact measurement of those particles, and it gives you a really nice assessment of, hey, if I'm looking at total shots on goal of particles that could harm my arteries over time, I actually would love to have an ApoB measurement and see that over time. So that's one that if you can get it in addition to your lipid panel, amazing. You can test that over time too to see if, it was high and you do things to bring it down, amazing. LP little a is a bit of a different story. So it's okay if this is an unfamiliar term, it just gets thrown out there, so I wanted to address it. Essentially, LP little a is similar. It's a good marker of potentially atherogenic particles. But the thing is, it's very mediated by genetics. So you only really need to test this one time in your life. This isn't something you need to monitor over time. It's just going to give you a really good idea of, is cholesterol a genetic predisposition issue for you? If yes, this is something you would want to talk to with your doctor. But if not, you're someone who could benefit from diet and lifestyle if you have any out of range lipid markers. So here are some optimal zones. I've included optimal versus clinical for you for the blood sugar markers here. And just to know on optimal versus clinical. Clinical, you're very welcome. I'm glad that makes sense. Questions at any time are so welcome. I know this is like a lot of info. But basically, when we look at a clinical range, what that is a bell curve of a population. It's just, what do most people in a population, where do they fall between when they get their results done? And the problem with that is, if you look over time, as a population gets unhealthier and healthier, these clinical ranges tend to move as well. And they're not equating to health, they're equating to what most of the population falls between. So it's not really a great standard to hold yourself to if you're interested in like being as healthy as you possibly can be. So what an optimal range is, or should be, is taking a subset of the population that's the healthiest and seeing where their ranges actually lie. Or what it also could be is looking in literature, so scientific evidence, and seeing what people have a certain level, like what level of a certain marker does someone have that they're the healthiest. They have the lowest chance of they have like reduced all-cause mortality, so they're less likely to die. They have less incidence of a certain disease. Like it's looking at the level of people have that are basically associated with better health outcomes. And then you can kind of fuse those things together to get this optimal range. And traditionally, this is kind of what you want to hold yourself to versus the ones that you get at the doctor's office or the lab, because they're going to tell you a better picture of the target that you're shooting toward. So stress and inflammation, these are things we can track as well. Stress, mainly you want to look at cortisol, which is your major stress hormone. A lot of stuff about cortisol out there today. So a couple things I want to say about it. When people talk about, you're puffy, you're tired, you're dysregulated, this is high cortisol. The problem with that messaging is that your cortisol is supposed to be high in the morning. It's supposed to shoot up and be at its highest within an hour or so of waking up, and then it's supposed to drop off during the day and be at its lowest before you go to sleep. It's on a diurnal rhythm. So what you really want is high cortisol in the morning and low cortisol at night. The problem is when you're just high cortisol all the time. But the blood test that you would get is AM cortisol. So if you're testing cortisol with your blood, you're going to get it tested in the morning, and it's going to be red with the assumption that it's at its highest, which is fine. But if you really want to understand what your cortisol is doing during the day, I would actually recommend a salivary test. And how you do that is you take your cortisol at 4 different times during the day. So you really understand if you have this nice decline over the day like you're supposed to, or if it stays chronically high. throughout the day. So that's really the only way to know that pattern. The other thing is there are things that can impact your cortisol levels, like if you're on birth control, like I'll talk about. And this is a really good marker to know regardless, because in the context of that hierarchy I talked about, your body is either going to make stress hormones or sex hormones. Cortisol and your sex hormones, like estrogen and progesterone, they share the same precursor. They have the same parent. And essentially, based on that fight or flight or more parasympathetic, like relaxed state you're in, your body will shuttle production of cortisol to be made if you're in that stressed out state, which is the danger of being chronically in that heightened state, or it's going to shuttle to your stress hormones or to your sex hormones, which we obviously need to have healthy menstruation and menstrual cycles. So it's really important distinction to know that they share the same parent, because now you can understand why chronic stress is such a danger to reproductive health and why we're seeing so many reproductive health issues in probably the most toxic environment, both physically and mentally and emotionally, in history, because it is we are in very biblical times, to put it lightly. So that whole metaphor of being chased by the bear that I talked about earlier. I mean, a lot of modern living is the bear. So it's not a bad thing to be heightened. What we want to do is build the capacity to switch between the two. And that's what I think is missed in the nervous system regulation conversation. It's not a bad thing to be on, but you do want the ability to switch into a healing, restorative state very easily. That's kind of the capacity and flexibility we're looking to build. It's not to completely ice out our stress production. We need it. Like we need this blast of cortisol in the morning and then coming down. This is what helps us function. But it's a really good thing to train the ability to move between those two states. Because then you have a nice, that those two pathways are then supported properly. And then we can look at inflammation, which is also really widely talked about, totally like correctly attributed to the root of many chronic diseases and illnesses. So one marker that's really good to look at is called HSCRP, that stands for high sensitivity C-reactive protein. And what that is, it's a marker of non-specific systemic inflammation. So it's not going to tell you where or what the inflammation is. It's just going to tell you, what your general level of inflammation is in your body. And then I like to tie this back to reproductive health as well. So if you have severe period pain or cramping, that is linked to higher inflammation levels. The inflammation can mess with that communication between the brain and ovaries, like I mentioned earlier. And this can lead to a lot of issues in the reproductive system, like irregular periods, long cycles, pain, random bleeds. I always like to remind people, or even tell people, because I don't think we're ever taught this, that endometriosis is not a period problem. It's not even a hormonal problem. It's actually an inflammatory one, which is very interesting. So here are your zones for HSCRP and AM cortisol. These are good to have as well in your pocket just to compare to what your lab will report. And then your thyroid. This is an amazing master regulator of your body. And when we talk about thyroid health, it's important to understand that your thyroid is responsible for proper operation of every muscle, organ, and cell in your body. It's really common to see just THS, so thyroid stimulating hormone tested. My recommendation to you is that the full thyroid panel is ideal. And the full thyroid panel is all of these markers that you see listed here. TSH is valuable. And if you're using blood work as like that one-off snapshot, just to like see where your health stands at the moment, it could be enough. But the way the thyroid operates, it's on a feedback loop. So it makes hormones that get back to the thyroid, that tell the thyroid to make more or less of the hormones. And it's just, you kind of need the full picture to really understand what's going on. And that's what the full panel is measuring. But what else I want to say about this? One more thing on the thyroid, it might come back to me, but oh yeah, TSH. So if you did get the TSH one off, like I mentioned, there is a difference, quite a difference between the optimal and the clinical range. So it's really common for someone to get TSH and not get any follow-up, a TSH reading, not get any follow-up because they're told it's normal. But say they got a TSH of 4, which put them within the clinically normal range. but out of range if you're looking at optimal. What we would call this is essentially subclinical. So your clinician wouldn't notice this because it's technically like within the clinically normal range. Hypothyroidism. So technically there is a thyroid issue going on here, but it's going undetected because you're still technically falling within this range. So if you were to get the full thyroid panel done, that subclinical hypothyroidism might become more obvious thanks to the other markers you have supportive here, whereas it might have gone missed with the one-off TSH. So just a small note for that, but it could be useful if you just want a quick assessment of overall thyroid health. So reproductive health, this is the one I'm obviously most excited about. And we're taught this whole system very, very poorly. So at a very, very high level, I want to tell you the story of these hormones because that will help you understand what to test and when to test, which I have written out for you as well. But when you think about the very start of the menstrual cycle, so this thing that happens on repeat throughout the course of our reproductive lives, essentially the very first hormone in the entire show is follicle stimulating hormone. So it comes from your brain, knocks on your ovaries doors and says, start making follicles. So this is usually like when you're having your period, this is happening behind the scenes. Start making new follicles. Your ovaries get the message. They start growing and producing estrogen. So the estrogen that everyone talks about gives you energy, makes you feel good, like this is coming from your ovaries. And when that estrogen gets high enough, I actually have the graph here to help illustrate. So the follicles are growing, growing, growing. They're spitting out estrogen, estrogen, estrogen. When that estrogen gets high enough, that is a trigger for LH, luteinizing hormone, to surge. When luteinizing hormone surges, this is a triggering event for ovulation. So you're back ovulation. When we ovulate, the thing that gets left behind, so essentially the egg left the ovary, but there was a sac that the egg was in. And that sac that the egg was in that got left behind is the thing that makes progesterone. So this is where we see progesterone dominating that second part of the cycle, so the luteal phase. And we really need this to essentially outpace the estrogen that's still being made. If we're not outpacing the estrogen that's being made with sufficient progesterone production, this is when we have really symptomatic PMS. Because of that progesterone insufficiency, this can lead to implantation problems if you're trying to conceive. This is why people typically report, really bad or really debilitating symptoms right before their period, typically all tied to this insufficiency of progesterone. If fertilization doesn't happen, progesterone will drop off toward the end of the cycle, and that's what triggers the menstrual lining to shed, our next bleed, and the whole thing happens again. So FSH tells the ovaries, okay, well done, guys, start it again. So I have included some of the hormones, but here are the optimal ranges. You don't want to test these all at the same time. You actually want to time the testing of certain hormones correctly, or if you do test them, at different times, interpret them correctly for the level that they should be at that point in the cycle. And I'll explain what that is. I have a graph for you. But basically, I put AMH in here because AMH is a well-known reproductive health marker that a lot of women get tested. And I have a rant for it. I think it's a wonderful thing to test if you can. But there's a huge caveat here. But it tells you nothing about your likelihood to conceive or the quality of your eggs. What it does tell you is how many eggs are in the bank that cycle. So it's a marker of ovarian reserve. And the thing about ovarian reserve is people will translate this as this is all the eggs I have. And if my AMH is low, I have poor fertility. No, no. Your AMH can change. Your AMH is telling you how many eggs are in the bank that particular cycle. There are things that you can do from a dietary perspective, lifestyle perspective, hormone supportive perspective that can increase your AMH. And by golly, if your doctor tries to test you, your AMH levels while you're on birth control or freshly off birth control, it's going to be disgustingly low. So definitely don't test it because birth control will suppress your AMH production because it suppresses your ovarian function. So my big caveat to this is know exactly all the nuances of what AMH can and cannot tell you. But if you've been off birth control for at least 3 to 6 months and you're interested in seeing what your ovarian reserve is at that point in time, absolutely, absolutely test it. but do know that it is a modifiable marker and it is not correlated with likelihood of conception or egg quality. Really, what it should be used for is if you're going to do like IVF or egg freezing, they want to test your AMH to see how good the egg retrieval is going to be. That's really what the proper use of AMH is. And I see it kind of get a bit, actually massively misinterpreted in the general context. So I leave you with that information. And then, as you probably noticed, the key event that's happening when we were looking at the reproductive health markers is all of this is happening for ovulation. Ovulation is the start. It's the whole reason the hormonal cycle takes place. And when we talked about your body's priority system, it's only going to happen if your system can handle it. So if you're not ovulating in a context of PCOS, when you have super, super long cycles, essentially what's happening is your body is struggling to ovulate or trying to ovulate and doesn't, tries again, doesn't. Or if you're having these bleeds that you assume are your period, but you're actually not ovulating, and if you're not checking for ovulation, there's no way to know that. This is sort of the route to figure out what the exact problem is. Is it hormonal? Is it nutritional? Is it metabolic? And my solution to this is to look at the reproductive system in such close detail to figure out, are you even ovulating? If yes, when? And then I'll talk more about this in a bit. This is the sort of like check your blood without checking your blood solution I have. It's via cycle tracking. But even if you are going to test your blood, knowing exactly when you ovulate is going to allow you to figure out exactly when you should book that lab appointment. So here's just an example. The recommendation, if you were to look it up online, hey, when should I test my progesterone? It will tell you cycle day 21. Why? It's assuming every woman in the world ovulates on day 14. And what they're doing, the real recommendation is you should test 7 days after you ovulate. So not every woman in the world ovulates on day 14, which is why if your doctor does not know this, you can get some really crappy information from your lab. So this, I'm putting this example on here. This was a client of mine who was trying to conceive, and she had a doctor's appointment scheduled, and they were going to test her progesterone. And we were working together for some time, so she knew all of this. And they said, okay, come on day 21. And she called them and she said, no, I'm not coming on cycle day 21. I ovulated on cycle day 21. So she would have gone in if she didn't know when she ovulated, gotten her progesterone tested. She hadn't even ovulated yet. So like we talked about here, progesterone doesn't rise until after ovulation, and it doesn't peak until 7 days after that. So for her, she would want to test progesterone 7 days after cycle day 21. So she wants to really test progesterone on cycle day 27. So she called her doctor and was like, I'm going to come on cycle day 27 because I ovulated on cycle day 21. And they were like, oh, okay, you're right. Yeah, 27, 28. I think she ultimately went on day 27 because that's when she could go. But just to show you now, she actually has a very accurate representation of the marker she's looking to understand what her value is. So that was just a really nice example of how you can use this in real practice. So here's your handy dandy chart. If you're trying to understand reproductive health, or if your doctor is including this in a workup that they're doing, really good to understand when you should test. So on cycle day 3, here's the list of what you would want to test. 7 days post ovulation. So again, I'm not giving you a cycle day here because not everyone ovulates on the same day. Some women it's cycle day 14, some women it's day 15, some women it's day 21. So only until you know that day for you will you be able to understand when the post-ovulatory blood test should happen on. However, you'll see that there's repeat here. So you can test estradiol on cycle day 3 and 7 days after ovulation, but the range is going to be different as well. So if you do that, make sure you're also comparing your results to the correct reference range because they are supposed to be different depending on where you are in your cycle. Most labs that aren't mentioned here, and the ones I did mention, are okay to test any day because they're not too influenced by any changes in hormones. So you are safe to get these tested on any day of your cycle, but it's really good to know the ones that you can't, or the ones that you should analyze differently depending on where you are. So hormonal birth control. If you are on hormonal contraceptives, there are some markers that I don't want to say you don't need to pay attention to if you get them tested, but I want you to take your results with a massive grain of salt. So those markers are going to be AMH. I mean, if you're on birth control, just don't test it, or truly, because you're not supposed to be making a lot of AMH because the role of hormonal birth control is to suppress your ovarian function. So on birth control, AMH levels can be reduced by up to 30%. It's a significant cut. So you'll just freak yourself out. You'll think you're screwed in terms of fertility. That's absolutely not the case. It's a temporary suppression. Once you come off birth control, I said 3 to 6 months, this returns to baseline. So don't worry. Just there's no need to test it while you're on contraceptives. Cortisol, this will go up by about 20 to 50% in some cases. And the reason for that is your liver is actually being encouraged to make more of the protein that binds cortisol. So essentially, what's happening is you have more cortisol in your bloodstream, but it doesn't mean you're like super stressed because of it. It just means that there's actually more bound cholesterol floating around that's being counted in a higher cortisol level. But when we talk about bound versus unbound, what that really means is inactive versus active. So that distinction isn't made when you get a cortisol test done. So just do know that if I'm going to actually show you my blood results of cortisol that I had on birth control and they were sky high. I freaked out because that's what people do, but have this understanding that that's actually something that you do expect to see on contraceptives, and it's not necessarily something that you have to try to act on. It is just a natural biochemical after fact of or systemic process that's going to happen if you are taking exogenous hormones. SHBG, this is your sex hormone binding globulin. So it's essentially a carrier protein that things like estradiol, estrogen, and progesterone can attach to. And this can go up considerably on birth control, so don't freak out if this is super high. Your lipid panel can be influenced a bit. It can increase the total cholesterol you make, and it can increase triglyceride levels a bit because it influences lipid metabolism a bit, not as significantly as these markers up here, but you can expect to see maybe a slight increase. And then nutrient levels. So what's actually happening is these can be depleted. So if you've ever heard of like zinc or B12 or folate or magnesium being reduced by birth control, this absolutely can happen. But this is why blood testing is so great too, because you can guess that this is happening to you, or if everyone's telling you, oh, birth control zaps your nutrients, like you got to take this multivitamin or this particular supplement. Like if your levels actually aren't low, that's not something you need to do. So knowing if you're actually low or not, this is going to be very valuable. And then sex hormones. So you can expect these to be very low because you're not cycling. They are suppressed. So let me show you guys my blood work. See if I can figure this out. Let's see. Can you guys see? No, it hasn't changed. Let's see. How about now? You see
Yeah.
cortisol?
Yeah, we can see that now.
Amazing. Okay, so like I said, I work for a personalized wellness company. This is Inside Tracker, this is where I work. And so I have an unhealthy amount of blood work for someone who was in their late 20s, now 31. Like it's just because it's free for us. So no like normal person needs this much blood. But let me just show you what happened in my case. I was on the pill until January of 2022. And look what happened after we came off. And I was freaking out. So this is cortisol, the stress hormone. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I am just like swimming in cortisol. Like these levels are so high. I kind of blasted out the chart here too. It goes like 22. I'm like 29, 29, 26, like extremely high. But this didn't mean that I'm walking around like with crippling anxiety. What this meant was the mechanism I talked about earlier, that this was actually a biological side effect of taking the hormones. So, like I said, the liver is being told, hey, you got to make more of this protein. It results in more cortisol being, floating around in the blood. but not the active version that could have actually been, doing the damaging effects that we associate with cortisol. But this looks really scary. So, and I didn't know this at the time. Oh my gosh, this was like, a bit before I started deep down this rabbit hole of reproductive health and wellness and all of this like secret information that no one bothered to teach us. But having that context now, it's like, oh yeah, I mean, this makes sense, but it's very jarring to see a completely out of range marker and have no one explain to you this is something that can happen when you're on birth control. So that was one example. And then really, you can see I just like dropped right back down to 5 over the course of, what was it, like 3 to 6 months. It was crazy. And not much change. I mean, I've always kind of ate the same, moved the same, managed my stress. Well, that's gotten better, but done things the same. But I just like to show you guys that as a live example. I also want to show you, what was the other one? Oh yeah, HSCRP. So this was the systemic inflammation marker that I had mentioned. Let's look at what I looked like on birth control. Again, I was maxing out the chart. Like this goes up to 3, 10, 10, 10, 10, 6.9, 8. And then January 2022 comes around, and look at that. The inflammation just drops. So again, am I walking around completely inflamed? Not really. I mean, this wasn't pretty to look at, and there are things that you can do from a wellness perspective that can mitigate inflammation, absolutely. So anti-inflammatory foods, aerobic exercise, plenty of sleep, certain like supplements that are amazing for antioxidant qualities and things like that, bringing down systemic inflammation. That's not to say that those don't help, they absolutely do. But in the context of taking birth control, I was doing all those things and it wasn't really making a difference because, again, the liver's being told, hey, you got to make more of this protein because of the message we're getting from these hormones coming in. So that's just to show you like a very real person's experience with this who, again, wasn't really getting the proper context, but hopefully to give you the proper context. And then let me show you the vitamins. So I mentioned that there are vitamins that can get depleted by birth control use, but I also mentioned this is why knowing your blood work is so amazing because I might have read all that information and started like doubling down on a multivitamin. And looking back, I actually always, except for here, I was probably under eating, honestly, at that point in time. Um, but I really never had a problem with vitamin B12. I mean, this was still clinically normal. We have our own optimal ranges as well, but essentially I was never out of range in terms of clinically normal. So overdosing on vitamin B12 could have been a risk for me if I didn't actually know that my levels were okay. Typically, if you're someone who eats a diet that has animal products in it, you tend to be getting adequate amounts of vitamin B12. And if you're not, blood testing would tell you that. So then you could say, all right, I do need to prioritize a supplement in this case. Um, let's see. Any other markers I want to show you? Okay, maybe I'll go back to the presentation because I want to be respectful of your guys' time. It's always fun to do a live little demo. Amazing. So this big reveal, now that we've talked about the labs, this is essentially what you can do without the blood. So if you're having a hard time getting blood or you haven't gotten it yet and you're wondering if there's a way you can peek into your body internally without having to like do a blood draw or go to a functional medicine practitioner just yet, you can. And that's through this method of cycle tracking that I use myself. This is what I have my practitionership in. I feel very strongly about everyone at least being told that this is an option that they have. And what it is, it's a daily way to check in on your reproductive hormones. So it's a proxy for estradiol and progesterone that we talked about through your fertile signs. I'll mention what those are. And it gives you an exact yes or no on your fertility status that day. So is today a fertile day? Yes or no, because women are only fertile 6 days out of the entire menstrual cycle. It also helps alert you to things like infections, STIs, or any bacteria present. It helps you identify and monitor the presence of cervical dysplasia, which is abnormal cervical cells, and it exists on a spectrum. So essentially what your pap smear is looking for is a high degree of abnormal cervical cells. Whereas in cycle tracking, there's actually a way to determine if you are lower end on the lower end of that spectrum. So before it manifests into something that would be a positive PAP or potentially develop into cervical cancer in the future, there is a way you can identify and reverse those abnormal cervical cells. It'll help you cross-reference your symptoms to hormonal patterns. So if you're struggling with anything from really any body system from a health standpoint, mapping it to your hormonal shifts can be a really incredible way to actually further pinpoint what's going on for you. And so one of the fertile signs I'll talk about is temperature. And essentially, certain temperature patterns can reveal thyroid or metabolism problems before you even get a thyroid panel or you even go get your blood sugar markers tested. And then it answers the age-old question, are you even ovulating? Which, like I mentioned, for some people, they may not be and not even know it. And if you are ovulating, when? Because knowing when you ovulate is going to tell you exactly when you need to go in for testing for certain markers if you're interested in knowing where you stand. So the method of cycle tracking that I talk about, teach, the technical term is the symptothermal method. And it is a method of fertility awareness. And I don't like the term fertility awareness because, like I said, I spelled it wrong. But like I said, it's useful for a bajillion other things other than knowing is it a fertile day, yes or no. That's not to knock the incredible ability that this gives you to use this method for natural birth control or to use this method as a method to try to conceive with a high degree of accuracy. But I love it for the daily health monitoring. So if we break it down, sympto is referring to your cervical mucus patterns, and this is done via an external wipe, so no digging for anything. And then thermal refers to your basal body temperatures, which if you've ever seen people use a thermometer or, there's a lot of fancy devices out there. I am a lazy girl, so I like to use my Oura ring. But there are armbands and wristwatches and a lot of ways you could track this yourself. So these two primary signs are proxies for two of the major reproductive hormones we talked about. So cervical mucus is going to give you a direct line of communication to what your estrogen is doing at any given day. And your basal body temperature is going to mimic that curve of progesterone. So it's actually funny if you look at the hormonal curve where we have it here, you see how you're not making progesterone until ovulation happens, and then you have this nice, you know, peak when you should be testing it 7 days after, and then this decline until the end of the cycle. And if we look at this is an example of a chart using this method. Now this is basal body temperature, and it's, you know, kind of variable, this like lower baseline, and then all of a sudden post ovulation we see this rise and decline. It's not your progesterone, but your basal body temperature is directly responding to the effect of progesterone. So it's a proxy marker for this hormone that you're making, which is super, super cool. So let's see, we're here. This is the other caveat to this method. I mean, if you've heard about, fertility tracking or cycle charting, and I had this preconceived notion too. It's unreliable, it's crunchy. This is, what religious people use and they always get pregnant. Like I had a lot of preconceived notions about it. But the thing is, there are many versions of cycle tracking and fertility awareness. This one that I'm teaching and talking about, there is plenty of evidence. I mean, there's literature that's where this 99% effective is coming from when you know the method correctly. There are rules, it's completely user dependent. So it is on you to know what you're doing, essentially, and to know the rules of the method and to apply them correctly. So if you're going to learn it, it's best to be taught by a practitioner to make sure you do the method correctly, but also that you analyze your chart properly. So if we see something like insufficient progesterone or scant cervical mucus or cervical dysplasia patterns, you'd want someone who can understand, okay, this is the problem we're seeing. Now here's what we do about it. And then you have that skill forever, which is such a big gift as someone who does use this method daily. But I say all that just to give it to you as an option that I think testing is amazing. I'm very happy it's becoming more and more accessible. There are more and more companies out there, like the one I work for, that give you the ability to track yourself over time. kind of cut out maybe a dismissive or uninterested doctor, because I have had my fair share of those. And with every positive comes a negative, right? So with all this data, it's amazing to have, but only when you can interpret it and use it properly. So my goal, my wish for you is that you have the ability and the empowerment to advocate for yourself, to get these tests done, yes, but then also the resources to know what to do with them. Because that at the end of the day is the most powerful thing. You want to be in conversation with your body. You want that two-way conversation. You want the two-way street. You want the feedback loop. And then the ability to say, okay, I tried this, it worked. I tried this, it didn't work, because we're getting all these recommendations from the internet and from friends and from doctors and from podcasts, but it's like, does it work for you? The things that work for me might not. The things that work for someone else may. So this is why the individual awareness of what's going on with you is like the most important thing that you could work toward or prioritize. So that's my mini mission to you. I want to help you build this muscle of interoception, so this inner awareness, and strengthen that brain body communication. We're really good, or did I say brain body? This is what we're really good at. We're really good at the brain telling the body what to do. We're less good at having the body talk to the brain. So, my mini mission for all of you is to choose one system to observe this week, probably the one that bothers you the most, the one that you feel off with most typically. So, I put a few options. Is it energy levels? Is it your sleep? Is it digestion? Is it your mood? Is it cycle related? And then I want you to take in information around it. So, like, feel it very deep, like, pinpoint it, but then also note the environment. So, the day of your cycle, if that's available to you, the time of day, what you felt, what was happening, because nothing happens in a vacuum. And then use your intuition muscle. So, ask yourself the question, what might my body be asking for with that recurring issue? I want you to write three answers from your brain and then pick one and then do that thing. And this is how we're going to start to build the interoception, the inner body awareness, which is really the crux of the symptothermal method. We're getting rid of insights, we're ditching predictive algorithms, and purely using your body and your own information as essentially the bread and butter for what to do next. Because that's what it should be, right? It's your body. They're very unique. What works for you is not going to be what works for everyone else. And when we talk about personalization, the only way to do that is to actually know what's going on in your body. So with that, I say thank you all. I know that was super heavy. I did see one question come in, but I invite any of you, if you have questions, to drop them in the chat. We have a couple minutes. Let me grab. Okay, let's see. If endometriosis is an inflammation problem, does that mean there's a way around it? I have not been diagnosed with endo, but I used to have debilitating cramps. I feel sick and switched to an anti-inflammatory diet, and the pain got bearable. Have an appointment with a gyno soon, so I'm hopeful. Yes, 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 yes. So this is an amazing question. And if anyone struggles with this or has struggled with this, I highly recommend the book Heal Endo by Katie Edmonds. And essentially, it has the answer to your question in here. Are there things that we can do that can reverse and even get endometriosis into remission? I had the exact same situation as you. And the interesting thing about endometriosis is the endo lesions are either, she uses it as a verb, endoing, so getting worse and essentially like creating more and more inflammation, or unendoing, like essentially the inflammation is being suppressed. And a lot of that comes down to what you do. So for you, like amazing, diet is a huge lever you can pull, and anti-inflammatory diet, amazing, sleep. There are a couple targeted nutrients. There are a lot of she calls this idea of salugens. We have stressors, and the opposite of that is called salugens. So essentially like pulling in as many salugens as you can to unendo and get that into remission, because it is I've done it myself even without a formal endometriosis diagnosis, and have helped a few other people do the same, and it's incredible that this is not something that's ever talked about because it is, yes, an inflammatory issue at its core. So let me know how that goes. I would love to hear how that appointment goes. This is so helpful. Thank you. You're so welcome. Katie, I'm curious to hear your take on Oura Ring and natural cycle. Oh, I want to tell you. Okay. First, I use it. I love the fact that I used to take the thermometer every morning, but let me say this. I don't trust natural cycles for birth control. I love it because it gives me the temperature transformation. But this is not actually basal body temperature. This is skin temperature change transformed via an algorithm. And actually, I did an experiment where I was charting like this. Like I do this for myself. This is actually my chart. And I did both the Oura ring and the basal body temperature. And I was impressed that they track very closely. Like the temperature patterns matched up very well. However, because this is on my finger and not actually my core body temp, it's always a few degrees lower than my true basal body temperature. And whenever I'm teaching someone how to chart, I always say start with the thermometer because when I talk about getting a sneak peek into your thyroid health from your temperature, you wouldn't know your true temperature if you were taking it on your finger. And what I look for when I'm looking for a thyroid issue is a low baseline body temperature. And that's exactly what your Oura ring is going to give you. So it's going to look a few degrees lower because it's on your finger and not your core. So for at least 3 months, I say do them together or use the basal body temperature just to make sure your temperatures are within the optimal range. If they are, amazing. Then you can transition to the wearable device. And I feel the exact same way about the ring as I do the armband. I think you should always take true BBT before you outsource to wearables. Why I don't trust natural cycles for birth control. Because the only information they're taking is temperature. And we talked about here, your temperature goes up after you ovulate. So they help you know when you ovulated after it happened. Great. They don't tell you jack crap about when you start becoming fertile, which is where all the risk of unintended pregnancy lies. Temperature is useless for opening the fertile window. It's great for closing it, but it's terrible for opening it. They give you red days to start your fertile window based on a predictive algorithm, which can be great. But for a lot of people, it's not. I'll give you my own example. I was using natural cycles and it gave me green days on days that I saw cervical mucus, which means, according to the method, that it was a fertile day for me. If I had not known that and I had trusted the natural cycles algorithm, I would have been screwed. Like and I have a pretty regular, like healthy cycle by my own definitions, which are definitions of optimality in terms of cycle parameters. So that to me is just, I love the ease of it for when it gives me the temperature reading, but I don't, to put a long story short, I don't trust it for birth control. I think we should have the ability to do it ourselves. Yes, such a helpful explanation. You're so welcome. If someone has had their period more than not, has had their period more than not over the last 3 months, um, they were pretty sure they had PCOS. They've been dismissed by their doctor when they're concerned about their lengthy periods. They're wondering when to get blood work now to help move forward. Any ideas? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. So the metabolic markers are going to be really important for them because often in PCOS, you're going to see increased insulin levels, you're going to see high fasting glucose or high HbA1c because usually there is a metabolic component underneath. The other thing they're really going to want to look at is um, like the LH, FSH markers, because LH and PCOS tends to be chronically elevated. This is another reason why people with PCOS struggle to try to conceive, not because they're unable to conceive, not because they're less likely to conceive, but because when they're trying to use ovulation predictor kits, they'll get a lot of false positives because LH is so frequently high, and they have trouble, their body might be trying to ovulate, like I said, trying to ovulate, trying to ovulate, trying to ovulate over the course of a long cycle. So you may have patches of fertile mucus, patches of positive ovulation predictor kits, but it doesn't actually mean that that's when you're ovulating with PCOS. It's harder to pinpoint. So I think actually any of the reproductive health markers that they can get, but definitely the metabolic markers as well. They're going to be pretty much anything. This is really the list that I like to give people when they're looking for a holistic assessment of their health. Where did I put it? I think it was the upside down triangle. Oops, this one can tell you more. But if you do want more targeted, like case specific stuff, guys, I hope is not luxury. I know I tend to be luxury because this is very dense material, but I love more than anything to have these conversations. So like do reach out for you, for a friend, for like any questions you have. This is how we get that information out there. We're not taught this stuff, even the most educated among us. I mean, this does the doctor, I teach doctors this stuff because they're like, I should probably know this for myself, and I would like to know this for my patients. So please reach out. Let me put my email in the chat. Email me, find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. I like to yell about periods and everything on the internet. But I offer free like chat sessions, literally just to like give you the lay of the land, give you any resources I might recommend, talk to you more in detail about learning this method for yourself. But I know we're at 4:05, so if there aren't any other questions, thank you all so much for your time. I could talk about this stuff all day, so I loved your questions. I loved your engagement, and thank you all so much.
Michelle, it's been so helpful, and I appreciated the way that you laid this all out so clearly. It was really, really great.
Oh
So
my
thank
gosh, you're so welcome, guys. It was so lovely to have you. I'll see you next time. Do reach out, definitely.
you. Okay, bye.